Democratic State Representative Victoria Neave Criado of East Dallas County, thank you so much for joining us. As you know, you're already at the Capitol. The legislative session is upon us. And so I'm wondering, what are your priorities this session?
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, Jack. We're excited about this session. I expect a fruitful session where we can move past the political polarization that we see often during the campaign season, and hoping folks will transition more to a governing mode so that we can deliver results for the people of Texas. I'm really honored to now serve as a chair of the Mexican American Legislative Caucus. It's been 30 years since a woman was elected to chair our caucus, Irma Rangel, 30 years ago. And so we want to make sure that we are prioritizing as a caucus legislation that focuses on Texas families, that helps our economy, that helps Latino-owned and other businesses in Texas make sure that they have the tools and the resources to thrive, especially given that we have a huge surplus in our budget. That is going to be one of our priorities, making sure that that is equitably distributed.
And so given your new position, how is that going to guide you on specific legislation?
So I'm real excited. Typically, as a legislator, we were focusing on issues. So now, as a chair of MALC, I get to broaden that scope and help also maneuver strategy for the caucus to prioritize legislation. So it's appropriations. It is developing uplifting legislation of our Mexican American Legislative Caucus members, from focusing on veterans. And there's a specific legislation that we'll be releasing very soon as well from different members. But really, as the billions of dollars that are in our coffers right now, and making sure that those dollars are appropriated in a way that our Texas economy thrives, that our Texas families thrive, is of utmost importance. Making sure that our schools have the resources that they need, that our neighborhood schools have that teachers aren't working two jobs just to make ends meet. So those types of policies are very much the main focus for us right now.
So there's lots, obviously, every session there are a lot of issues. And, one of the things that you mentioned is this record surplus that the legislature will have in place. And Governor Abbott campaigned on taking, at the time, it was $27 billion. It may be more, taking half of that surplus and using it for property tax relief. Where are you on that issue?
So we definitely think that property tax relief is something of utmost importance to our constituents, and fully funding our schools and increasing the level of funding will also impact, because those two things are directly correlated. If the state fully funds our schools, that will impact property taxes. But we certainly have to address property tax reform in light of the rising rates that are impacting families. We don't want people to be priced out of their homes because they can't afford property taxes. So that is certainly an issue. As is helping businesses. We want to help small businesses thrive, to make sure that they are creating jobs. Latino-owned businesses are some of the fastest growing in the state and the nation, and small businesses as job creators is also a focus for our caucus.
When you talk about schools, one issue, obviously, that has come up quite a bit since the pandemic began is learning loss. How big of an issue is that for you? And is there any legislation that you're working on that might help school districts deal with that?
So I can tell you, we continue to hear from our school districts and our teachers, and in general, they want to make sure that they have the funds that they need to make sure that our kids are graduating college ready, that our kids are prepared to enter the workforce. If they don't enter college, that they're able to enter into and get the skills and training that they need in high demand jobs, like and different trades. Right now, we have a huge shortage of teachers, and we also have a huge shortage in the nursing field. So encouraging our students to go into those fields is also important for us. But we want to make sure that our schools have the resources, that our teachers, that we're not losing teachers. We have to make sure, as they're educating our next generation of students, that they're getting paid what they deserve. And so that is part of addressing the learning loss. And it's something that we know that our schools locally here in Dallas-Fort Fort Worth and across the state are continuing to work on, but we need to make sure that they have the resources. And this budget surplus is definitely, there's no excuse for not fully funding our schools. And so that's why we're advocating for that.
And so does that mean boosting teacher pay?
Absolutely. We must boost teacher pay. The fact that some of them are working 2 jobs just to make ends meet is unacceptable. They are taking care of our children. They are educating our next generation. We need to make sure that they are getting paid what they deserve.
You know, I have to also mention Uvalde, because that was, obviously such a tragic story on so many different levels last year. And one thing that came out of that was school security. And so is the state, in your estimation, going to have to boost and help school districts come up with the funds to make their campuses safer?
Yes, and that has been a priority since the Uvalde shooting. And I will say that just continues to be tragic as you see the families grieving their tweets on social media. This is heartbreaking for them. And we feel how difficult it is for them to have lost a child. Nobody should have to go through that. And so it is in our hands as a legislature. We have the responsibility to make sure that our schools are safe. And one of the other things that the families are calling for is raising the age to purchase an assault rifle to 21. 21 for 21 is what they're calling it. And really that's something that we want to continue to advocate for. It was an 18-year-old that, got an assault rifle and was able to commit this atrocity. And so we want to support the families by advocating to raise the age to 21.
Isn't that going to be a difficult thing to accomplish, given that the legislature is still Republican, both in the House and the Senate? Plus, you have a judge, federal judge, that ruled against the state's existing law keeping handguns out of 18, 19, and 20-year-olds.
Right. We know it's not an easy task, but these families deserve us to do everything that we can to advocate to change the law. The lives of children are at stake, the lives of families in Texas, and it's not just schools. It's making sure that our churches are safe, that the grocery store is safe. The fact that we have an increased, it's so easy to get a gun in Texas. We have to make sure that we are passing laws like a bipartisan. It should be on a bipartisan basis. This really shouldn't be a partisan matter of wanting to raise the age. It's a reasonable, common sense solution to this. And we saw the federal government was able to come together on a bipartisan basis to pass laws at the federal level. We should be able to do that in Texas here as well.
What about mental health?
Mental health is absolutely an issue. The state has been prioritizing and focusing on that. Mental health has impacted children. It's impacted our health fields. I mean, it is something that, when we look at telemedicine and other options, we need to also make sure that we have counselors in our schools that are assisting kids, that are able to identify and give them the wraparound services that they need whenever they see issues.
There is still policies in the works to fix the grid and for the long term. There were many changes made after the 2021 storm, but those were on a short-term basis. Weatherization, making sure that the power plants and natural gas facilities are protected against the extreme cold as much as possible. But the electricity market in Texas is going to have to be changed to make it more reliable. How important is this issue that the legislature have its stamp of approval on this?
It's extremely important. The fact is that we didn't do enough last session as a legislature. This last winter, freeze that we had, it was concerning that folks could potentially be without power again. And in fact, some were. Lives were lost in that significant freeze before the last session. And our state is one of the best states in so many different respects, and our grid needs to be strong. We need to ensure that we have weatherization, that we're holding companies accountable, so that families are not having to worry about whether the lights are going to be on come when it gets cold.
Another issue that we saw make national headlines in the last year was abortion here in Texas. Are you going to be filing any legislation that would seek to change the law?
So I'm pro-choice, and as a member of the Texas Women's Health Caucus, our Women's Health Caucus is absolutely looking at different ways to prioritize. Some of the work that we're doing is really looking at the preemptive, like making sure in terms of maternal mortality is one of the highest. Texas has one of the highest death rates of women after they give birth. So ensuring that we have laws in place, that they are getting the treatment, the screenings that they need is a priority. I also do a lot of work with respect to sexual assault. When we have women who are raped in our state, the fact that women who are raped are now having to go out of state in order to access reproductive health care is really concerning, and it impacts women across the board, but it disproportionately impacts women who don't have access to the same resources that wealthy women do, for example. So those are issues that are a priority for me as a female legislator in our state, and I can share with you that we're going to continue to advocate to bring changes so that women aren't sacrificing their lives because of extremist positions in our law.
Have you spoken with Republicans in the House who may be open to expanding the exceptions to include rape?
I'm hopeful. We've heard discussions. We are going to be sworn in on Tuesday, and I look forward to having those discussions with my colleagues across the aisle. And I'm hopeful that there will be enough of them that will be willing to do that, so that in those cases of rape and incest, that women are able to access the health care that they need.
And then border security, as you know, the state has increased significantly the amount of money that is spent to secure the border. And I'm wondering what your thoughts are on that, and whether that should become permanent spending, and the fact that President Biden has now announced for the first time in his presidency, he's going to be going to the border in El Paso, in Texas specifically.
So I'm really glad that President Biden is coming down to the border. We have members of the Mexican American Legislative Caucus that are on the front lines. Their local communities are having to expend resources. So we need action from the federal government in order to provide comprehensive immigration reform. It is something that we have been advocating for years and has been done in the past on a bipartisan basis. We just need to, both Democrats and Republicans, be able to have serious discussions about the changes that we need. And so I'm glad that President Biden's coming here will hopefully open the door to additional discussions about what needs to be done, not just at the federal level, but at the state level as well.
Do you agree with the state boosting of funding to respond to what's going on at the border?
So there are lots of different facets. One, we need to make sure that our local communities have the resources that they need so that people are not sleeping on the streets or in dangerous conditions, that people are not being trafficked, that human trafficking is being addressed. At the same time, there's lots of debate and discussion surrounding what those funds are going to be used for. So I think we need to just really closely scrutinize how the funds are going to be used, making sure that they're getting in the hands of the frontline local communities who need them to address the what's happening right now on the border.
Just a couple of political questions. The House will have to select a speaker. Do you see Dade Phelan becoming speaker again?
I think we're going to be able to elect a speaker, unlike what's happening in Washington, D.C. right now.
I mean, will you support Phelan?
So, and I will share, Jack, that I'm really honored to have been appointed by Speaker Phelan as a chair of a committee, as a Democrat in a Republican majority, Republican majority House. And so I think that, we expect to continue to see him work across the aisle. That's something that's really important. And I expect that he will be elected again.
Which committee, and this is for this coming term?
No, I'm currently the chair of the Juvenile Justice and Family Issues Committee.
Okay, and for the new term, are you expecting to be able to continue in that role?
That will be up to the speaker.
And what about that? Because as you know, there have been growing calls by various Republicans in the legislature and the Texas GOP that there should not be any Democratic committee chairs. What's your response to that?
Texas is very different than Washington, D.C. In order for us as legislators to get things done, to move the ball forward for millions of Texans who are relying on us, we have to work across the aisle. And really not appointing Democratic chairs would really disrupt that history of working across the aisle, because a lot of what we do is not partisan. Sometimes it's an urban versus rural divide, I think the highly polarized or the highly partisan issues a lot of times are what make the news, but most of what we do is not partisan. So for us, it's really important that we're able to have conversations, that we're able to work across the aisle. And that's important for Texas in general. We need to be able to govern on a bipartisan basis. And so that's why it's important to have Democrats also as chairs of committees.
And my last question, and I very much appreciate your time, and that is, some Republicans have said, well, there should be repercussions for the Democrats who broke quorum during the last session. And so what do you say about that? They say, why should Democrats be in positions of chairing committees when a majority of them broke quorum?
So breaking quorum, we did that to protect the rights of our fellow Texans, their right to vote, and that we were exercising the rules of the House to be able to do that. And that's what the rules provide. And we did everything that we could to be able to, and we were successful in bringing some changes to the elections bill. And so the voting rights of Texans is so fundamental to everything that we do. And we use the rules of the House as they're laid out.
State Representative Victoria Neave Criado of East Dallas County, thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate it very much.
Thank you so much for having me.